The lawyer had just given Corey a company, Grace a set of investment accounts, and Christine the house where Walter Patterson had died. Then he looked at Sydney and asked if she had brought a vehicle large enough for her inheritance. For one foolish second, Sydney thought he meant there was something else downstairs. A cabinet, maybe. One of her father's workbenches. Walter had owned tools too heavy for a person to lift alone, and machines that needed two men and a loading ramp. Christine lowered her eyes to the polished conference table. Corey sat back in his chair. Grace pressed her lips together. Sydney knew all three expressions. They were waiting for something embarrassing. "What kind of vehicle?" Sydney asked. The lawyer, Martin Bell, checked the last page in front of him. "A hatchback should be sufficient, possibly an SUV. The item is approximately 4 feet long." Corey released a short breath through his nose. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it had started as one. Mr. Bell reached for the office phone. "Would you bring in the Patterson trunk, please?" Sydney looked at Christine. "What trunk?" Christine touched the gold clasp on her handbag. It was in the attic. That didn't answer the question, and Christine knew it. She had become very good at giving Sydney sentences that sounded complete until you tried to use them. The conference room door opened. A young office assistant backed through it, dragging one end of a warped steamer trunk. A building custodian carried the other. They set it on the carpet with a damp, heavy thump. Sydney recognized it immediately. The trunk had belonged to her grandfather, Bertram. It was wood under cracked black canvas, with rusted metal straps and leather handles that had dried into stiff brown loops. Water had swollen one corner, the lid bowed upward in the middle and dipped near the lock. A pale stain ran down one side, like something had sat against it for years. Walter used to keep it in the garage when Sydney was young. Later, it moved to the Winchester attic because Christine said it smelled like a basement. Corey stared at it. "You actually had them bring it here?" "It's listed in the will," Mr. Bell said. "I know, but I thought she'd get a photograph or something." Sydney kept her hands beneath the table. Mr. Bell turned one page toward her. Walter's signature sat at the bottom, familiar even in its shakier form. Her father had always made the W too wide. It leaned over the next letter as if protecting it. The paragraph above the signature was brief. "To my daughter, Sydney Patterson, I leave the steamer trunk formerly belonging to my father, Bertram Patterson, together with all contents therein." Sydney read it twice. "All contents," Corey said. "Maybe there's a mouse." "Corey," Grace murmured. "What?" "We've all seen it." Christine gave Sydney a careful look. "Your father was sentimental about that old thing." Sydney turned from the page to the trunk. One rusted corner had torn the office carpet. "And that's all?" she asked. The room became very quiet. Mr. Bell folded his hands. He had conducted enough will readings to know when a question belonged to the family rather than the document. Still, he answered because nobody else did. "That is the full specific bequest made to you." Christine had received the Winchester house and its contents. Walter's contracting company, Patterson Finish and Frame, went to Corey, who had worked in its office for 4 years and on actual job sites for less than one. Grace received the investment accounts. There were smaller gifts to 2 trade organizations and Walter's church. Sydney received a trunk the family had spent 20 years threatening to throw away. She looked again at her father's signature. Walter had died of heart failure in January. He'd been 68. He had gone into the kitchen early one morning, filled the kettle, and sat down at the table while it heated. Christine found him there when the whistle started. Sydney knew this because Grace had called her from the driveway before the ambulance left. She also knew Christine had been beside Walter for 7 years. Christine had organized his medication, corrected his diet, and bought the slippers he wore through the heels. Corey had worked in his company. Grace had eaten Sunday dinner with him most weeks. Sydney had been the daughter who called from another state, heard tiredness in his voice, and promised to visit when work settled down. Work had never settled down. She pushed the document back toward Mr. Bell. "Was there a letter?" "Not among the materials provided to my office." "Did he explain why?" "No." Corey glanced at his watch. The contracting business was already his in his mind. He was thinking about Walter's office, the company trucks, and whether Nathan Rivera would become a problem when Corey changed the shop schedule. Sydney couldn't know all of that yet. She only saw impatience on his face. Christine reached across the table. Her hand stopped before touching Sydney's. "He probably thought you'd want something connected to your grandfather. Did he?" "I believe so." "Did he ever say that?" Christine withdrew her hand. Not in those exact words. Grace looked toward the trunk. Guilt sat badly on her. It made her helpful in small ways and silent in important ones. "I can have someone take it to the dump for you," she said. "You don't need to deal with it today." There it was, the family solution. Make the awkward thing disappear before it took up space in anyone else's life. Sydney stood. The custodian shifted near the door. Mr. Bell offered to arrange temporary storage, but Sydney shook her head. "No, it was left to me." "Sid," Corey said, "you don't have to prove anything." She looked at him. "I'm taking my property." He lifted both hands. "Fine." She signed the receipt beside the words, "One steamer trunk. Condition poor." The office assistant found a dolly. As they rolled the trunk through the lobby, one damaged wheel squeaked on every turn. People waiting near reception moved their feet aside. Sydney walked behind it with her father's copy of the will held against her coat. She could feel Corey and Grace following, though Christine stayed back to speak privately with Mr. Bell. Outside, the February air cut between the buildings. Boston had received sleet that morning. Gray salt water lined the curb, and the sidewalk had been shoveled into narrow paths. Sydney's rented hatchback waited in a parking garage 2 blocks away. Corey stopped beneath the office awning. "Just leave it," he said. "Seriously. Bell can dispose of it." He offered storage. "That means they'll charge you." I understood him. "You're going to pay to move garbage because Walter put your name beside it?" Sydney gripped the will tighter. "Dad put my name beside it." Corey's face changed at the word Dad. Walter had never asked Corey to call him that. Corey had done it twice at the funeral, both times while speaking to people from the company. Grace stepped between them without making it obvious. "I'll help get it into the car." "You're wearing suede boots," Corey said. "They're boots. They cost $600. Grace looked down at them. "Then, this can be their first useful day." Sydney almost smiled. That made the next silence worse. Corey pulled his keys from his pocket. "I have a meeting at the shop. Christine needs us back for dinner. Then go," Sydney said. He hesitated. He wanted her to tell him this was fine. All of them wanted that. If Sydney said the trunk meant something, they could leave with the house, company, and accounts without feeling they had watched Walter cut his only daughter out. She didn't give them that. Corey walked toward the garage without saying goodbye. Grace helped Sydney push the trunk through the slush. The dolly wheels caught in cracks. By the second corner, the office assistant's hands were red. At the garage, they lowered the rear seats and tried the trunk straight on. It wouldn't fit. They turned it sideways. The swollen lid scraped the roof lining. Grace removed her coat and climbed through the passenger door to pull, while Sydney pushed from behind. "Watch your hand," Sydney said. "I have it. You don't. I have most of it." The trunk slid forward with a tearing sound. Both women froze. Grace peered beneath it. Just the blanket. Sydney had put an old moving blanket in the cargo area that morning. She hadn't known why. Perhaps some part of her had expected a tool chest after all. They shoved the trunk in until the hatch could close. Grace brushed rust from her palms. "Where are you staying?" "A hotel near Sullivan Square." "You could stay at the house." Christine didn't ask. She assumes you don't want to. "That's convenient." Grace rubbed one thumb over the other. "Sydney, I didn't know what the will said." Sydney believed her. Grace had been shocked when Mr. Bell read the accounts to her. She had covered her mouth and whispered, "All of them?" Grace's surprise didn't make the result smaller. "Did Corey know?" Sydney asked. "I don't think so." "Did Christine?" Grace looked back toward the law office. That was an answer. Sydney opened the driver's door. "Sid, wait." She waited. Grace pushed loose hair behind her ear. "Your dad talked about you. People keep telling me that now." "He did. At Christmas he asked if you were still doing that furniture class." "It wasn't a class. I worked weekends at a repair cooperative." "Right. That." He remembered. Sydney placed the will on the passenger seat. "He had my number." Grace flinched. Sydney immediately wished she could take the sentence back, not because it was false, but because Grace wasn't the person who owed her an answer. Walter had called, just not often enough, and rarely when Christine or Corey was in the room. He asked about Sydney's job in Providence, the rent on her small apartment, and whether the old radiator still knocked at night. He sent photographs of cabinets he was building. Sydney sent pictures of damaged chairs from the cooperative and asked what kind of glue he'd use. They could speak for 40 minutes about a split table leg. They couldn't speak for 40 seconds about why Sydney no longer came home. "I'm sorry," Grace said. "For what?" Grace's eyes filled, but she blinked and held herself steady. "I don't know which part I'm allowed to be sorry for." A car waited behind them. Its driver tapped the horn. Sydney got in. "Go back to your family, Grace." The words landed harder than she intended. Grace stepped away and closed the door. Sydney drove out of the garage with the warped trunk rattling behind her. 3 days earlier, she had been in Providence answering phones at a commercial flooring supplier. Her desk stood beneath an air vent that blew cold year-round. She kept a cardigan on the back of her chair and a jar of instant coffee in the bottom drawer. Her life was ordinary in ways she usually appreciated. Rent was due on the 1st. The upstairs neighbor ran a blender every morning. On Saturdays, Sydney worked at the cooperative, where people brought in chairs with loose joints and tables damaged during moves. She wasn't a master carpenter. Walter had made that clear when she was 19 and thinking about joining his company. "You've got patience," he'd told her. "You don't have speed yet. I could learn speed. You could. But you'll spend 5 years being my daughter before anyone sees your work." At the time, Sydney thought he was protecting her. Later, Corey entered the company and received a desk before he knew the difference between maple and birch. Sydney left Massachusetts soon after Walter married Christine in 2019. There hadn't been one dramatic fight. That would have been easier to explain. The distance formed through smaller things. Christine replaced the family photographs in the living room, then said the older ones were safe in boxes. Corey began using Walter's workshop without asking. Grace's friends filled the kitchen on Sundays. When Sydney visited, someone had moved her coat or taken her usual chair. Nothing was cruel enough to name. Everything told her the household had developed a shape that no longer required her. Walter noticed. He just handled it badly. "Give it time," he'd say. Time for what? For everyone to settle. Sydney had thought she was the thing being asked to settle. Dust did that. It found a corner and stopped inconveniencing people. The worst argument came 2 years before his death. Walter canceled a planned weekend with Sydney because Christine had arranged a dinner for clients. Sydney said she was tired of being moved whenever the Calderans needed space. Walter went quiet. Then he said, "They're my family too." Sydney heard the two and missed everything else. "Then, I'll stop making you choose." She ended the call. He didn't call back that night. By morning, pride had hardened around both of them. After that, they spoke carefully. Birthdays, weather, work. Walter once mentioned that his own father had lost a house in Charlestown, but Sydney had heard that story before. Bertram had bought a row house when Walter was young and lost it to foreclosure in 1975. Walter had watched the family belongings carried outside. The house was sold, then sold again. It belonged to strangers. That was how Walter told it. "It taught me never to borrow against a roof," he'd said. Sydney believed the house was gone for good. She never asked for its address. Now she drove north on Interstate 93 with Bertram's ruined trunk behind her and Walter's will on the seat beside her. Her phone rang as she entered the tunnel. Christine's name appeared on the dashboard. Sydney let it ring twice before answering. "Hello? Are you driving?" "Yes." "Then call me later." "You called me." Christine exhaled. "I wanted to make sure the trunk fit." "It fit." "That's good." Traffic slowed under the city. Red brake lights spread ahead. Christine continued. Corey was upset when he left. Corey inherited a business. He wasn't upset about the will. What was he upset about? The tension. Sydney changed lanes. He'll recover. Sydney, nobody wanted today to hurt you. That was the kind of sentence Christine trusted. It removed the person who had done anything. Hurt simply arrived, like weather. "Did you know what Dad left me?" Sydney asked. A pause followed. Christine had known this question was coming. She had prepared several truthful answers and disliked all of them. "I knew about the principal gifts." "So yes." "Walter asked me not to interfere." "When?" "Last autumn." "Did you ask him why?" "Of course I did." "And?" "He said the trunk belonged with you." "Why?" "He wouldn't discuss it." Sydney looked in the rearview mirror. The trunk sat crooked beneath the hatch. Was he angry with me? No. Was he trying to punish me? No, Sydney. Then why would he give Corey the company and Grace the accounts and leave me something everyone called garbage? Christine's voice softened. "Your father made choices near the end that weren't always easy to understand." Traffic began moving. Sidney held the wheel with both hands. What does that mean? It means he was tired. He was sick more often than he admitted. Sometimes he forgot conversations. Are you saying he didn't know what he signed? I'm saying grief makes people ask questions that may not have clean answers. Sidney heard a horn behind her and realized she had slowed. Mr. Bell didn't say Dad lacked capacity. Martin wouldn't. The will was properly executed. Then, don't suggest it to me. I'm not suggesting anything. Please don't turn every sentence into a fight. Sidney nearly ended the call. Instead, she asked, "What was inside the trunk?" "I have no idea." "You never opened it?" "The lock was stuck." Walter wouldn't let anyone damage it. That was the first useful thing Christine had said. When did he move it to the attic? Years ago. Before or after you married him? I don't remember. Did he ever take it down? Another pause. Once, Christine said. Maybe twice. I found dust on the stairs and asked what he was doing. He said he needed an old hinge. From inside it, I assume so. What did the hinge look like? I didn't see it. Sidney glanced back again. Christine's tone tightened. It's an old trunk. Don't build some mystery around it because you're unhappy with the will. I asked what he did with it, and I answered. The call went quiet. They could both hear the road under Sidney's tires. Finally, Christine said, "Dinner is at 7 if you want to come." Sidney pictured Walter's place empty at the table, Corey discussing company jobs, Grace trying to redirect everyone, and Christine serving food on plates Sidney's mother had once chosen. "No, you shouldn't be alone tonight. I'm not coming." "All right." Christine waited, hoping Sidney would change her mind. Sidney waited too, though she didn't know what she wanted Christine to say. "Drive safely," Christine said. The call ended. Sidney passed the exit for her hotel. She didn't decide to do it until her hands had already guided the car toward Charlestown. Nathan Rivera's restoration shop occupied the ground floor of an old brick warehouse near the Mystic River. A small painted sign read, "Rivera Woodwork and Restoration." Walter had complained that the lettering was too plain. Nathan said plain lettering was easier to read from a truck. Sidney had not seen Nathan since the funeral. He had stood near the back of the church in a dark suit that didn't fit across his shoulders. Corey sat with the family. Nathan didn't. After the service, he hugged Sidney and said, "He kept your first dovetail in his desk." Before she could ask what he meant, Christine called her away for photographs. The shop door was open now. Warm yellow light fell across the wet pavement. Sidney parked near a stack of covered lumber and went inside. Nathan stood at a work table repairing the curved arm of an old settee. He wore a gray sweatshirt dusted white at the cuffs. A pencil rested behind one ear. He looked up. "You look frozen. Hello to you too." "Hello." "You look frozen." The shop smelled of sawdust, coffee, and the faint sharpness of shellac. A radio played low near the back wall. Sidney had forgotten how calming a working shop could be. Nothing in it pretended damage wasn't damage. Broken pieces were labeled and laid out where someone could see them. Nathan set down his clamp. How was the reading? Sidney looked around for somewhere to put the will. That good? She handed it to him. He read the first page standing up. His expression stayed neutral through the house, the company, and the accounts. Then he reached Sidney's paragraph. "The trunk," he said. "You know it?" "I helped Walter carry it upstairs." "When?" "About 6 years ago." Christine said she didn't remember. She wasn't home. "Did you open it?" "No." "Walter wouldn't let me." Nathan lowered the will. "Where is it?" "In the car." His eyes moved toward the open shop door. Sidney said, "My entire inheritance is blocking the rear window." Nathan took the pencil from behind his ear. "Let's bring it in." They used a furniture cart and a folding ramp. Nathan did most of the lifting, but he didn't tell Sidney to move aside. The trunk came out with a scrape and settled onto the cart. Under the shop lights, it looked worse. The wood had twisted along the back. One metal strap was loose. The lock plate had turned green at the edges. Nathan ran a hand above the lid without touching it. "Bertram's," he said. "That's what the will says. Walter talked about it." "To you?" "Sometimes." "What did he say?" Nathan checked the leather handle, mostly that nobody knew how to store old things properly. Sidney gave him a tired look. "That sounds like him." They rolled the trunk inside and cleared space near the work table. "I want to open it," she said. Nathan glanced at the clock. "Tonight? I have a hotel room and no reason to go back to Winchester." That isn't what I asked. Do you have somewhere to be? He did. He had promised a restaurant owner in Cambridge that the settee would be ready by morning. He also had an unpaid invoice, 2 employees arriving at 7, and a mother in Chelsea who expected him to fix her kitchen drawer on Sunday. Nathan's life did not stop because Walter had died. That was one reason Sydney trusted him. He picked up his phone and sent a message. "What did you cancel?" she asked. "Nothing. I moved something." "You don't have to do that." "I know." Nathan crouched beside the trunk. He examined the lock, then the hinges. "If we force this, the lid may split. Can you open it without forcing it?" "Probably." "How long?" "Could be 10 minutes. Could be 2 hours." Sydney took off her coat and laid it over a chair. "I'll make coffee." The lock took 40 minutes. Nathan cleaned it with a narrow pick, added a small amount of oil, and worked the mechanism without bending the plate. Sydney stood beside him holding a flashlight. Twice she thought she heard movement inside. Nathan told her it was loose hardware. At last, the lock gave a soft click. Sydney stopped breathing for a moment. Nathan kept one hand on the lid. "Ready? It's probably blankets. Probably. Or a mouse. Corey say that? How did you know? He's never had an original thought in his life." Sydney laughed before she could stop herself. It came out rough, almost painful. Nathan waited until she nodded. He lifted. The warped lid resisted, then opened with a dry wooden groan. Inside lay an old wool blanket, 2 leather straps, and a layer of yellowed newspaper. No jewelry, no cash, no explanation from Walter. Sydney removed the blanket. Dust rose into the light. "That's it," she said. Nathan didn't answer. He took out the newspaper, then pressed his palm against the bare interior floor. He measured the depth with his fingers. After that, he stepped back and looked at the trunk from the outside. "What?" Sydney asked. "Bring me the tape." She found it on the work table. Nathan measured the trunk's exterior height. Then he measured the interior. He checked both numbers again. Sydney watched his face. "What is it?" "The base sits too high." "How high?" "About half an inch." "Water swelling?" "Not evenly." He tapped the inside floor near one corner. The sound was flat. He tapped closer to the center. A hollow knock answered. Nathan looked up at her. Sydney stared into the empty trunk her family had laughed at. And for the first time that day, she wondered if Walter had left her exactly what he meant to. She reached toward the bottom panel. Nathan caught her wrist. "Wait. What? If somebody built a compartment, we don't start by putting a screwdriver through it." He released her and went to a cabinet beside the finishing room. Sydney watched him pull out a thin steel ruler, a putty knife, a pair of cotton gloves, and a small inspection light attached to a flexible cord. "You have a special drawer for secret compartments?" she asked. "I have a drawer for damage caused by people in a hurry." He put on the gloves and ran the ruler along the inside edges. The bottom looked like one piece of dark wood. Years of dirt had filled the seams. Near the rear left corner, the ruler stopped. Nathan bent closer. "There's a pin." Sydney held the inspection light while he cleaned around a metal point no wider than a match head. It sat deep in the corner, almost hidden beneath the lining. "Push it?" she asked. "Maybe." "What else would it do?" "Break." He pressed it with the end of the ruler. Nothing happened. Nathan tried again while lifting gently at the opposite edge with the putty knife. A narrow line appeared across the bottom. Sydney leaned over his shoulder. "That's a lid, a false lid." Walter had made false panels for clients who wanted to hide jewelry or documents. He disliked the cheap ones sold in catalogs. Those had magnets or obvious finger holes. His open through pressure applied at 2 different points. He used to say a lock made people curious, but good joinery made them look elsewhere. Nathan found a second pin beneath the torn lining near the front. Sydney pressed that one while he held the first. A quiet wooden snap came from below. The false lid rose less than an inch. Neither of them moved. Nathan looked at Sydney. "You open it?" She slid her fingers beneath the edge. The panel was thin, but heavier than it looked. Walter had glued narrow strips of lead along the underside so the trunk floor wouldn't sound hollow when someone knocked on it. The compartment beneath was shallow. It held a large brown envelope wrapped in waxed cloth. A smaller white envelope rested on top. Sydney recognized Walter's handwriting before she read her name. S-Y-D. Just those 3 letters. She took off one glove because her fingers had started shaking. Then she put it back on. Nathan stepped away from the trunk. "You can read it alone," he said. "No." You sure? No, I'm not sure. Stay. The white envelope wasn't sealed. Inside was a piece of lined paper cut from a small notebook. Walter had written one sentence. Ask Tim about the tools, the rest is behind them. Sydney turned the paper over. Nothing. Who's Tim? She asked. Nathan stared at the note. I know 3 Tims who worked with Walter. Would any of them know what this means? One moved to Florida. One hasn't spoken to him in 15 years. The other is Timothy Wang. Who is Timothy Wang? He lives in Charlestown. Walter did work for him? What kind of work? I don't know. He never took me. Nathan said that last part differently. Sydney heard the small bruise in it. Dad took you everywhere. Not there. She read the sentence again. Asked him about the tools. The rest is behind them, she said. Behind what tools? Could mean a cabinet or a wall. Or Walter knew you'd ask 10 questions and left Tim to deal with them. That sounded possible too. Sydney set the note on clean brown paper. Then she lifted the waxed bundle from the compartment. The wrapping had been folded with the neatness Walter brought to everything. No tape, no string. The cloth opened around a document inside a clear archival sleeve. At the top were the words, Quitclaim Deed. Sydney knew what a deed looked like. She had seen one when she signed the papers for her mother's small storage unit after it was sold. This one had several pages and an embossed registry stamp. The property address appeared halfway down the first page. 14 Monument Court, Boston, Massachusetts. The buyer's name was Walter Patterson. Sydney looked at the date. 2012. Did you know about this? She asked. Nathan came closer. No. He bought a house 14 years ago. Nathan read over her shoulder. Looks that way. He never told me. No. He never told Christine. I don't know what he told Christine. He hid the deed in a trunk she wanted gone. Nathan didn't argue with that. Sydney lowered the document. Monument Court. Is that near here? About 10 minutes. Have you heard of the address? No. She searched the pages for a photograph, a description, anything that explained why Walter had bought it. The legal description meant little to her. It named boundary lines, neighboring parcels, and an old plan filed with the city. The final page carried the recording information from the Suffolk County Registry of Deeds. This could be a copy, she said. It is a copy. I mean, it could be meaningless now. He might have sold the place. Could have. Or lost it. Could have. You're being very calm. One of us should try it. Sydney sat on the edge of the work table. Nathan moved a tray of screws before she knocked it over. Walter had owned another house while telling her he was cutting back on work. He'd bought it before marrying Christine, while Sydney was still living in Massachusetts. In 2012, she had been 13, old enough to remember the months when he claimed every spare dollar was going into the contracting business. She had believed him. Nathan pulled a laptop from beneath the counter. What are you doing? She asked, checking whether the address exists. It did. The online map placed Monument Court on a narrow side street several blocks from Nathan's shop. Street view images showed a short row of attached brick houses. Cars lined one side. Small front steps rose directly from the sidewalk. The number 14 wasn't visible in the first image. Nathan moved along the street one frame at a time. There, Sydney said. The house stood between a pale blue row house and one with dark green shutters. 14 was narrower than Sydney expected. Its brick front had been painted brown many years ago. Much of the paint had peeled away. Plywood covered the first floor windows. A chain crossed the front steps, and a faded orange notice was fixed to the door. The image was 8 months old. Sydney enlarged it until the picture blurred. That's not an investment property, she said. No, it looks abandoned. Yes. Why would he buy that? Nathan's gaze stayed on the screen. Maybe he planned to restore it. Did he have time for that? He made time for things he didn't discuss. She looked at him. Nathan closed the map. That came out wrong? No. It came out exactly right. He sat across from her. For 13 years, Walter had been the man who gave Nathan a key to the shop and trusted him near machines other people wouldn't let him sweep around. Nathan knew Walter's coffee order, his preferred saw blades, and how he checked a level by turning it end for end. Yet the deed surprised him too. That mattered to Sydney. She didn't want to be the only person outside the locked door. Can we check if he still owned it? She asked. Probably. Registry records are public. Nathan found the Suffolk County Registry website. The search page asked for names, document types, dates, and book numbers. Sydney read the number from the stamp. A scanned record appeared. It matched the document in her hands. Walter had bought the row house from a small holding company in June of 2012. Purchase price, $187,000. The record confirmed the deed had been filed. It didn't tell her what happened afterward. Nathan started another search. Sydney put her hand over the keyboard. Wait. He looked at her. She didn't know why she stopped him until the words came. I want to do this properly. We're only searching records. I know. She glanced toward the open shop door. Christine knew about the trunk. She knew Dad took it down at least once. Corey just inherited his files, his office, everything in the company. If there's something here, I don't want to announce that I found it before I understand what it is. Nathan leaned back. You think somebody's watching registry searches? No. I think I spent all day letting other people tell me what Dad meant. I don't want to do that again. That was her first deliberate decision since the will reading. Taking the trunk had been instinct. Bringing it to Nathan had been the same. This was different. She would slow down. She would keep the papers safe. She would find Timothy Wong before asking anyone in the family for an explanation. Nathan studied her for a moment. All right, do you have a safe? I have a file cabinet. Is it locked? It will be. He photographed the document exactly where they found it. He took wide pictures of the trunk, then close ones of the hidden pins, the false lid, the waxed cloth, and Walter's note. Sydney wrote the time and date on a shop invoice because it was the nearest paper available. Nathan scanned the deed without removing it from the sleeve. Then he put the original, the note, and the photographs into a clean document case. You should hold this, he said. I'm in a hotel. Then it stays in the cabinet. You just said I should hold it. I changed my mind. The file cabinet stood in his office. Nathan cleared a shelf, placed the document case inside, and locked it. He handed Sydney one key and kept the other. Back in the shop, Sydney closed the false lid. The bottom dropped into place so neatly that the seam disappeared again. Dad made that, she said. Nathan shook his head. Not the whole trunk. The compartment, probably. How can you tell? Different wood. The trunk floor is pine. The false panel is poplar with a mahogany stain. Walter used that combination in drawer bottoms, so he altered his father's trunk to hide the deed. Looks like it. Why not put it in a safe deposit box? Then you wouldn't have found it today. Sydney looked at him. He couldn't know I'd take the trunk. He put it in the will. My family tried to send it to the dump in the lawyer's lobby, but you didn't. Nathan returned the gloves to their drawer. He wasn't trying to make a larger point. Walter had trusted some fact about Sydney's nature, and Nathan had simply stated it. Her phone vibrated on the work table. Corey had sent a message. Did you get rid of it? Sydney read the words twice. Nathan saw her expression. Who? Corey. What does he want? To know whether I threw away the trunk. Are you going to answer? She typed, It's handled. Corey responded almost at once. Good. One less problem. Sydney placed the phone face down. Nathan returned to the settee he had been repairing. He tested the clamp, adjusted it, then looked toward her. I can find Timothy's number in the morning. Why not tonight? Because it's nearly 10 and he's 71. How do you know his age? Walter made me deliver a birthday gift last year. You said Walter never took you there. He sent me to his apartment, not the row house. Where does he live? Monument Court. Sydney stood so quickly the table shifted. Nathan caught the deed scan before it slid to the floor. You knew that? I knew Tim lived on Monument Court. I didn't know the address on the deed until tonight. How close does he live? 2 or 3 doors down, maybe. I'd have to check. What was the gift? A wooden toolbox. Sydney went still. Nathan understood at the same moment. Ask Tim about the tools, she said. They looked toward the locked office. Nathan picked up his coat. We can drive past. You just said it's nearly 10. Driving past doesn't require waking him. I want to see the house, I figured. They left the trunk in the locked shop and took Nathan's pickup. Sydney carried Walter's note in a plastic sleeve inside her coat. The sleet had stopped. Streetlights shone on wet brick and dirty piles of snow. Nathan drove through Charlestown without using directions. He passed narrow homes with steep steps, a corner market closing for the night, and a laundromat where one woman sat beneath white fluorescent lights watching clothes turn. Monument Court was easy to miss. Nathan turned between two brick buildings, then slowed where the road narrowed. "There's Tim's," he said, pointing to a house with a red door. Number 10. 14 stood 2 doors farther down. The street view image hadn't shown how badly the roof gutter sagged. It hung loose above the second floor. One boarded window had opened at the corner. The chain remained across the steps, but the orange notice on the door was new. Nathan parked opposite the house and shut off the engine. Sydney read the notice from the truck. "Unsafe structure. Looks like a city posting. Can they tear it down?" "Eventually, if nobody deals with it." She stepped out. "Sydney, I'm staying on the sidewalk." Cold air moved down the court. Water dripped from the damaged gutter. Up close, the front steps were cracked, and one iron railing leaned away from the brick. Sydney stopped at the chain. The house looked empty. Then she noticed the first-floor doorframe. The plywood covered most of it, but the frame beneath had been repaired with a precise inset patch. The grain ran in the right direction. The corners met without filler. She knew that work. Walter had repaired the back door of her childhood home the same way. Nathan came up beside her. He saw it too. "He was here," Sydney said. A light switched on behind the curtains at number 10. The red door opened. An older man stepped onto the stoop wearing house slippers and a heavy green coat over his pajamas. He held a flashlight in one hand. "Who's there?" Nathan moved beneath the streetlight. "It's Nathan Rivera." The man lowered the flashlight. His eyes shifted to Sydney, then to the posted house, then back again. Nathan said, "This is Sydney Patterson." Timothy Wang's hand tightened around the flashlight. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he came down one step and looked directly at her. "You found the trunk," he said. Sydney took the note from her coat and held it where he could see. Timothy didn't come closer. "Read it," she said. "I don't need to. You knew what would be in the trunk." "I knew Walter put something there." "What?" "He didn't tell me." Nathan glanced at the dark windows nearby. "Maybe we should do this inside." Timothy looked at the row house again. "Not in there. Not tonight." He led them into number 10. The front room was warm and crowded with books, framed photographs, and small wooden boxes. A half-finished cup of tea sat beside an armchair. On one wall hung a black-and-white photograph of Monument Court, taken many years earlier. The row houses looked nearly new. Laundry lines stretched between upper windows, and 3 men stood beside a parked delivery truck. Timothy locked the door behind them. "Sit," he said. "I need to put on pants." He disappeared upstairs. Sydney remained standing. She went to the photograph. Number 14 had pale brick then. 2 flower pots sat on its steps. "Is that Bertram?" Nathan asked. One of the men beside the truck had Walter's broad forehead and Sydney's narrow shoulders. He wore work clothes and held a wooden crate against one hip. "I've only seen him old," she said. Timothy returned in brown trousers and the same green coat. He carried a rectangular wooden toolbox with a single brass clasp. Nathan recognized it. "That's the one I delivered." "Yes." "You knew Walter made it?" "I watched him make half of it in my kitchen." Timothy set the toolbox on the dining table. It looked new except for several shallow marks near the handle. Each corner had tight hand-cut joints. "He sent me here with it," Nathan said. "He wanted you to know the street. Why didn't you tell me that?" "Because he told me not to." Nathan's jaw shifted. Timothy noticed. "You think I enjoyed lying to you? I think everybody keeps saying Walter told them to keep quiet." "He did? About his own daughter?" "Especially about his daughter." Sydney sat across from Timothy. "Why?" He took off his coat and folded it over the back of a chair. "Because Walter could keep a promise for 50 years, but he couldn't explain one for 5 minutes. That doesn't tell me anything. No. It tells you what kind of evening this will be." Timothy opened the toolbox. Inside lay 6 hand tools, a marking gauge, a folding rule, 2 chisels, a small hammer, and a worn block plane. The tools were older than the box. Their wooden handles had gone dark with use. Nathan lifted the block plane. "Stanley," he said. "Old one." "Bertram's," Timothy told him. Sydney looked from the tools to the note. "The rest is behind them." Timothy removed the shallow tray holding the tools. The space below contained a ring with 3 keys and a folded sheet of paper. Sydney reached for the paper. Timothy covered it with his hand. "Before you take anything into that house, you need to hear what it is. It belonged to my grandfather. It belonged to your great-grandfather first. Sidney frowned. Bertram bought it from his uncle, Timothy said. The uncle had no grown sons who wanted it, so he sold it to Bertram in 1962. Your father was 4. Sidney looked at the photograph again. Walter told me Bertram bought a house and lost it. He told the short version. Timothy sat. His family had moved on to Monument Court in the mid-70s. He had known Bertram during the last difficult year, when work became irregular and notices began arriving by certified mail. Bertram repaired wooden windows and installed cabinets. He was good with his hands and bad at admitting he had no money. By 1975, the loan was too far behind. Walter was 10, Timothy said. He stood on that sidewalk while men carried the furniture out. Bertram kept telling everyone there'd been a mistake. There wasn't a mistake. Sidney saw the scene without wanting to. Walter at 10, tall already, watching strangers handle his mother's chairs and his father's tools. What happened to Bertram? He rented in Somerville. He worked until his hands stopped letting him. And Dad? He never stopped looking at this house. Timothy pushed the folded paper toward her. It was a hand-drawn floor plan of number 14. Walter's writing marked repairs in different rooms. Roof framing, rear masonry, second-floor joists, front stairs. Dates appeared beside some entries. The earliest was from 2012. The latest was from last September. Sidney held the paper flat. He was restoring it, trying to. For 14 years, he bought it back first. Took him 37 years to do that. He never told me. I know. Did Christine know? Timothy's expression hardened. Walter said she didn't. Corey? No. Grace? No. Nathan? Timothy looked at Nathan, not the address. Nathan returned the block plane to the tray. He brought me salvage doors, window sash too. From here, Timothy said. He told me they were for a client who kept changing his mind. The client was Walter. Nathan walked toward the front window. His irritation had moved beyond Sidney for the moment. Walter had used him to repair parts of a house while making sure he never knew the whole job. Sidney asked, "Why hide it from everyone?" Timothy rubbed both hands over his knees. At first, shame. Bertram losing the place stayed in him. Walter didn't want people watching in case he lost it again. And later, it became about who would get it. Sidney waited. Timothy looked toward the ceiling, as if Walter might object from the second floor. He said family could become careless when property was visible. People started counting rooms before a person was dead. He didn't want that house divided by people who only saw what it might sell for. Who was supposed to get it? Timothy didn't answer directly. He made me promise I'd help the person who came with the note. Sidney held it up. That's me. Yes. So, he meant me. He meant you to ask. That isn't the same as handing you a finished answer. She leaned back. You sound like him. I've had years of practice being annoyed with him. Nathan turned from the window. What are the keys for? Front door, cellar hatch, rear gate. The front door has plywood over it. The original door is behind the plywood. Walter fixed it before his heart got worse. When was he last inside? Sidney asked. November. Why did the city condemn it? Timothy's face changed. That was when the evening stopped being about an old promise and became a present problem. A pipe broke during the cold snap, he said. Water ran from the second floor for at least a day. I called Walter. He came out, shut it off, and started pulling plaster. The city saw the debris during another inspection. What other inspection? The rear wall moved. Nathan came back to the table. How much? Less than an inch, Walter said. That can be enough. They posted the notice in December. He told me he had an engineer coming. Did the engineer come? I don't know. Sidney picked up the key ring. Can we go inside now? Nathan answered first. Not in the dark. I have a flashlight. That isn't the problem. The notice says unsafe. It doesn't say the building falls down after sunset. It also doesn't tell us where the floor is soft. Timothy nodded. Morning? Sidney didn't want morning. Morning gave fear, time to become sensible. Still, she put the keys into her coat pocket. Is there anything else under the tools? She asked. Timothy lifted the empty box and showed her. No? Then what does the rest is behind them mean? It means Walter expected you to use them. On what? The staircase. Nathan and Sidney both looked at the floor plan. The front stairs were marked with a small circle near the bottom post. No words explained it. Timothy tapped the circle. He rebuilt that staircase 3 times. Why 3? Nathan asked. First time, the city made him change the rise. Second time, he said the newel was wrong. Third time, he stopped complaining. What was wrong with it? He wouldn't say. Sydney folded the plan. You know there's something there. I know Walter spent 6 nights making a post that should have taken 2. That was enough to bring them back at 8 the next morning. Timothy had coffee waiting in paper cups. Nathan brought hard hats, respirators, work lights, and a moisture meter. Sydney arrived from the hotel wearing jeans, an old sweater, and boots she had bought at a 24-hour department store after leaving Nathan's shop. The chain across the steps wasn't locked. Timothy removed it and leaned it against the railing. Nathan inspected the porch, the door frame, and the plywood before letting Sydney climb. The largest key fit. Behind the outer plywood, Walter's repaired door opened inward. The smell came first. Wet wood, mold, cold brick, and something sour from standing water. Nathan switched on his light. Don't step past me. The front room had stripped plaster walls. Exposed wooden lath showed in long sections. A blue tarp covered part of the ceiling. The floorboards were dirty, but mostly clear. Sydney entered. The house was narrow and deeper than it looked from outside. Light came through gaps around the boarded windows. A fireplace stood along one wall. Walter had removed its cracked surround and stacked the pieces in numbered rows. Beyond the front room, the staircase rose against the party wall. It was beautiful. The lower steps curved gently into the room. The rail was walnut, smooth but unfinished. The newel post stood solid and square, with a carved cap that matched the one in Timothy's old photograph. Sydney touched it. Not yet, Nathan said. She pulled her hand back. He checked the floor room by room. The kitchen ceiling had fallen near the rear. Water stains spread down the walls. In the basement, temporary posts supported one joist. The rear foundation showed a long diagonal crack. Nathan spent 20 minutes there without speaking. How bad? Sydney asked. Bad enough? That isn't a number. I don't have one yet. They climbed to the second floor. The broken pipe had damaged 2 rooms and part of the hall. Walter had opened the walls around it, exposing clean copper repairs. A bucket beneath one joint held a skin of ice. The front bedroom contained a folding chair, a work lamp, and Walter's old canvas tool bag. Sydney stopped in the doorway. She knew the bag. It had sat behind the driver's seat of his truck for years. One pocket still held the red carpenter's pencil she'd sharpened with his knife when she was young. Walter had been here in November. He had sat in that chair. He had carried tools up those stairs while telling Sydney on the phone that he was spending his evenings at home. Nathan crouched beside the bag but didn't open it. He was using his light set, he said. The heavy tools probably stayed downstairs. Timothy stood in the hall. He got tired near the end. Sydney folded the chair and leaned it against the wall. What happens now? She asked. Nathan looked through the open ceiling. We make it safe enough to inspect. Then an engineer looks at the rear wall. Nobody sleeps here. Nobody works alone. I didn't say I was sleeping here. You were thinking it. She had been. A city truck stopped outside. Timothy went to the front window. That will be Mr. Hale. Who's Mr. Hale? Sydney asked. The building inspector. Nathan looked at Timothy. You called him? No, he comes every Monday. The inspector entered wearing a reflective coat and carrying a tablet. He looked at Nathan's equipment, then at Sydney. Who authorized entry? Sydney showed him the key. My father owned the property. Name? Walter Patterson. Mr. Hale's expression softened slightly. I heard he passed. You knew him? I met him here. Sydney took out the deed copy. The inspector read the first page, then handed it back. This proves he bought it, he said. It doesn't prove you control it. I'm his daughter. That doesn't do it either. The words were plain, not unkind. Mr. Hale showed her the active violations. Unsafe rear masonry, water intrusion, no working heat, open electrical runs, exterior materials at risk of falling onto the public way. How long do I have? She asked. The emergency stabilization order gives the owner 30 days from the posting date. 11 remain. And after 11, the city can seek authority to secure the structure, perform necessary work, and place the cost as a lien. If the rear wall becomes an immediate hazard, the timeline gets shorter. Nathan asked for the engineer's report. There wasn't one on file. Then Mr. Hale showed Sydney a separate notice from the tax office. The outstanding property taxes, interest, and municipal charges totaled $22,400. Sydney read the figure once, then again. My father left this unpaid. I can't speak to that. Can the city take the house? Tax title proceedings have started. You need the collector's office for details. She had $9,000 in savings. The hotel, a rental car, and moving the trunk had already taken more than she wanted to count. Nathan drew her aside. You don't own this just because the deed was hidden with your inheritance. I know. You may spend money protecting a house that falls into the estate. I know. And the will gave the estate assets to other people. I heard the will. He lowered his voice. Then we find the rest before you pay for anything. Sydney looked at Walter's staircase. 11 days remained before the city's next step. Somewhere behind the work her father had left unfinished was an answer he expected her to earn. She turned to the inspector. What can we do today without making the violations worse? Mr. Hale looked at Nathan. Nathan took out a notebook. For the next hour, they made a list. Secure the loose gutter. Remove wet material. Brace the basement opening. Keep weight away from the rear rooms. Arrange the engineer. Document everything. When the inspector left, Sydney signed Nathan's copy of the list as the person requesting emergency work. The signature didn't make the house hers. It meant she had chosen not to let it fall while she found out whether it ever could be. Nathan wrote her name at the top of a fresh page, then listed what he could provide without charging her. Sydney looked over his shoulder. No? No what? No free labor. It's emergency bracing. It's still labor. You can argue with me after the wall stays up. He had 2 workers coming to the shop that afternoon and a settee already late. The house could take every hour he had if he let it. Sydney understood that. She also knew Walter had once given Nathan 13 years of work, instruction, and trust. Nathan wasn't going to measure this job by an hourly rate. They settled on materials at cost and labor recorded for later. Sydney made him write that down. Timothy volunteered to wait for the structural engineer. I live 2 doors away, he said. It's not a sacrifice. You have your own life, Sydney told him. My life includes not having that rear wall fall into the alley. That was his practical interest, and he didn't hide it. The row houses shared old drainage lines, narrow access, and more history than space. Trouble at number 14 never stayed entirely at number 14. By noon, Sydney had bought contractor bags, respirator filters, work gloves, and a pry bar. She put the charges on a credit card she usually paid in full. Nathan returned to his shop. Sydney and Timothy stayed. They removed wet plaster from the front edge of the second-floor hall, where the joists were sound. Timothy carried half-filled bags downstairs. Sydney took them outside. Neither pretended his knees could handle more. At one point, he found her looking into Walter's open tool bag. You can touch it, he said. I know. She knelt and pulled the zipper. Inside were a tape measure, a small square, 2 pencils, a chalk line, and a folded pharmacy receipt from October. Walter had bought heart medication in Winchester that morning. 4 hours later, he purchased copper fittings from a hardware store in Charlestown. Sydney turned the receipt over. On the back, he had written 3 measurements. He was working here after picking up his medication. He came when he could. Did you ever tell him to stop? Constantly. Did he listen? Did he ever listen to you? Only when I agreed with him. Timothy smiled. Then you knew him. The structural engineer arrived the next morning. Nathan met her at the house before opening his shop. She examined the rear masonry, the foundation crack, and the temporary posts. The rear wall needed stabilization, but it wasn't about to collapse without warning. Steel bracing and a repaired drainage line could stop the movement while they prepared a permanent plan. Her fee in the first materials deposit came to more than Sydney had in checking. Sydney transferred money from savings while standing in the front room. Nathan watched her finish on her phone. That's enough for today. It gets us the report. It also gets you closer to paying interest on groceries. I have a paycheck. You also have an apartment in Providence, for now. He looked up. What does that mean? It means I can't keep paying for a hotel. You're not sleeping here. I heard you the first 3 times. Timothy appeared from the kitchen with coffee. My upstairs room is empty. Sydney started to refuse. It has heat, he said. It has a door. You can pay me by carrying the recycling down on Thursdays. I don't want to move into your house. Neither do I. I offered a room. Nathan took a cup. That's different. Sydney looked between them. You two are enjoying this. A little, Timothy said. She checked out of the hotel that afternoon. Her suitcase fit at the foot of Timothy's guest bed. The room held an old dresser, a reading lamp, and a window facing number 14. At night, Sydney could see the dark row house from beneath the shade. Christine called twice. Sydney let both calls go to voicemail. Grace sent a message asking whether she had returned to Providence. Sydney answered, "Not yet." Grace asked if she needed anything. Sydney typed 3 replies and erased them all. Finally, she wrote, "I need time." Grace sent back, "Okay." For 4 days, the house settled into their lives. Nathan came before work to inspect whatever Sydney planned to remove. He returned in the evening with braces, clamps, or advice. Timothy kept the front key and signed for deliveries. Sydney worked remotely from his dining table during business hours, answering flooring orders and explaining delays to contractors. As soon as her shift ended, she changed clothes and crossed the 2 doors to number 14. They didn't touch the staircase. Nathan insisted on clearing overhead hazards first. Sydney understood, though every pass by the newel post tested her patience. They repaired the loose gutter before another freeze. They removed soaked insulation from the rear ceiling. Nathan capped 2 unsafe electrical runs. Sydney learned how to test old boards before putting her weight on them. Walter's work appeared everywhere once she knew what to look for. He had labeled salvage molding on the back so each piece could return to its original room. He had repaired window frames instead of replacing them. Behind a stack of plywood, Nathan found 3 cabinet doors he remembered building years earlier. "He paid me for these," Nathan said. "He paid you to work on his own house without telling you? He said they belonged to a woman in Beacon Hill. Did he invent a whole client?" "Apparently." "What was her name?" "Mrs. Nettles." Timothy looked up from sweeping. That was his 5th-grade teacher. Nathan closed his eyes. Sydney sat on the bottom stair and laughed until dust made her cough. The laughter didn't excuse Walter. It did make him present in a more useful way. He had lied awkwardly, planned carefully, and left several people holding different pieces of the same job. On the 5th evening, Nathan arrived with a padded tool roll. Sydney looked at it. "What's that?" "Bertram's chisels." Timothy had cleaned the old tools, but hadn't sharpened them. Nathan had taken the 2 chisels back to his shop and worked their edges by hand. "You said Walter expected us to use them," Nathan told her. "Now we can." They set up 2 work lights around the staircase. The newel post had no visible latch. Nathan ran his fingers beneath the cap and along the molding. Sydney checked the floor plan again. Walter's small circle sat on the side facing the wall. "There isn't room behind it," she said. "Depends what he meant by behind." Timothy stood several feet away. He always removed the rail first. "How?" Nathan asked. He covered it with a drop cloth. "I never saw." Nathan examined the joint where the rail entered the post. 1 walnut plug had been cut across the grain. It was nearly invisible beneath the finish. He handed Sydney the smaller of Bertram's chisels. "You do it. I'll damage it. Then go slowly." She placed the edge against the plug. Her first pressure did nothing. "Both hands," Nathan said. "Don't twist." Sydney adjusted her grip. The plug moved a fraction. Nathan held the light closer. She worked around it until the thin walnut circle came free. Behind it sat a brass screw. The screw was old, but the slot had been cleaned recently. Walter had expected it to turn. Nathan loosened it. The bottom section of the rail shifted outward. "There," Sydney said. A narrow panel ran behind the rail, fitted into the staircase wall. It had looked like ordinary trim. With the rail released, the panel slid upward. Behind it was a long cavity between 2 studs. The opening held no money. It held Walter's blue metal document box. Sydney recognized that too. It had once sat on a shelf in his home office. Christine told her he'd thrown it away during a clean-out. The box had no lock. Sydney carried it to the front room and set it on 2 sawhorses. Nathan placed Bertram's tools beside it. Timothy closed the front door, though nobody had passed outside. Inside the box were 3 bundles. The first contained old purchase papers dated 1962. Bertram Patterson's name appeared beside the address. A faded photograph showed Bertram and his wife standing on the front steps. Walter, 4 years old, sat on the railing with one hand held out toward the camera. Sydney touched the edge of the photograph. The second bundle was thicker. A cover page read, "Patterson Monument Trust." The date was August of 2017. Sydney read the first paragraphs and understood almost none of them. The document called itself irrevocable. Walter was named as the settlor and original trustee. 14 Monument Court appeared on an attached property schedule. Then she found her own name, Sydney Elise Patterson, sole beneficiary. She read the line again. Nathan leaned beside her. What does it say? I think it says the house is in a trust. Since when? 2017. Before Christine, Timothy said. Walter had married Christine 2 years later. Sydney turned through the pages. A notarized signature appeared near the end. Another document looked like a recorded certificate connected to the property. Her relief rose too quickly. She pressed it down. We need a lawyer. Yes, Nathan said. This could be old. He could have changed it. It says irrevocable, Timothy told her. I don't know what that means in practice. Neither do I. The final bundle contained a letter, not a line on notebook paper this time. 6 handwritten pages, dated the same day as the trust. Sydney unfolded them. My dear Sydney, she read aloud. Her voice failed on the next sentence. Nathan pulled a chair behind her, and she sat. The letter explained what Walter had never managed to say directly. He wrote that Bertram's house had been the measure of failure in their family for too long. Walter bought it back in 2012 because he wanted that loss to stop traveling forward. He didn't tell Sydney because he feared making her responsible for a promise she hadn't chosen. He had watched her repair discarded furniture. He had seen her refuse easy replacements when something sound remained beneath the damage. She had her grandfather's grit, Walter wrote, though he hoped she had more sense than either man. Sydney stopped and covered her mouth. Nathan looked toward the boarded window. Timothy kept his eyes on the tools. She continued. Walter wrote that the house would go to the child who understood keeping, not merely owning. The person might not be the one sharing his roof when he died. It had to be someone willing to see value before other people announced a price. In 2017, he placed the row house into a trust for Sydney. He did it before any later marriage, debt, business decision, or family claim could confuse what he meant. He kept the arrangement separate from the company and his ordinary estate. The house was hers if she wanted the work. If she didn't, she was free to sell it. He had not protected it, so it could become another trap. Near the end, Walter finally addressed the years between them. I kept waiting for the right conversation, Sydney read. Then I kept building things because wood was easier. That was cowardly, and I'm sorry. She lowered the page. Nobody hurried her. The last paragraph was short. Walter asked her to let Timothy tell the truth if anyone challenged his intent. He asked her to trust Nathan's judgment about the structure, though not his estimates because Nathan always charged too little. He asked her to finish the front stairs, whether she kept the property or sold it, because he had left the last section raw. Sydney looked toward the walnut rail. The wood waited without a coat of finish. She placed the letter beside the trust. Timothy sat across from her. He made the promise after he signed those papers. Right at this table. What promise? That the house would belong to the child who showed Bertram's grit. Not the person who happened to share his roof. Not the loudest person in the room. You knew he meant me? I knew he had named you. I didn't know where he hid the documents. Why didn't you call me when he died? Because his instruction was clear. I was to help if you found the note. If you didn't, I was to wait until the estate closed, then take the toolbox to his lawyer. Sydney looked at the trust again. The will reading had not been Walter giving everything valuable to Christine, Corey, and Grace while leaving her a family joke. He had removed the house from that division years before. The warped trunk had not been the inheritance. It had been the test of whether she would look. The test didn't establish legal ownership by itself. Sydney knew that before Nathan said it. The papers looked real. Sarib. Walter's signature looked real. The notary seal had left a raised circle beneath Sydney's thumb. Still, the city had already taught her that a document could mean less than she hoped. The next morning, she called 3 attorneys. One didn't handle trusts. One could see her in 6 weeks. The third, Monica Santos, asked Sydney to read the exact title from the first page. Patterson Monument Trust, Sydney said. Do you have the complete document? I think so. Do you have any recorded deed or certificate dated around the same time? There's a certificate with registry numbers. And the original purchase deed? That was in another place. Monica paused. Another place? It's complicated. It usually is. Bring everything Friday morning. Don't remove staples, write on pages, or give the originals to anyone. Can you tell me if the house is mine? Not from a phone call. What should I do until Friday? Protect the building from immediate damage. Don't sell it. Don't borrow against it. Don't sign anything concerning ownership. Sydney looked through Timothy's window at number 14. I can manage that. Her confidence lasted until Luke Montoya arrived that afternoon. He wore work boots and a navy wool coat, not the suit Sydney expected when he introduced himself as the principal of a preservation firm. He carried a leather folder beneath one arm. I've been trying to speak with the owner of this building for 3 years, he said. Sydney remained on the front step. How did you find me? Emergency stabilization permit. Your name was listed as the contact. That doesn't make me the owner. I understand. What do you want? To see whether the house can still be saved. Nathan came down from the second floor. He knew Luke by reputation. They had bid against each other for restoration work twice, and Luke's firm had won both jobs. You're trying to acquire this block, Nathan said. 3 properties, not the whole block. 4, if you count this one. Luke smiled slightly. I count this one. Timothy appeared behind them with a thermos. He's been leaving letters in my mailbox for years. They were addressed correctly. They were still unwanted. Luke accepted that without argument. Sydney let him inside after he signed Nathan's visitor sheet and put on a hard hat. He spent almost an hour in the house. He examined the front brick, window openings, stair rail, fireplaces, and old floorboards. In the basement, he took photographs of the joists and measured the foundation. At the rear wall, he read the engineer's temporary plan twice. This wasn't a casual project, he said. My father was a master carpenter. That explains the interior. It doesn't explain how he found these moldings. Nathan pointed toward the numbered stack. Original to the house. Most of this court lost its federal trim during renovations. Sydney had heard the word federal used for buildings. She hadn't understood it could change the way Luke touched a piece of wood. How old is the house? She asked. Early 1840s, most likely. Possibly a little earlier. Timothy poured coffee into the thermos lid. The city record says 1844. The city record also calls this a 2-family dwelling. It hasn't been one for nearly a century. Luke led Sydney outside and stood across the street with her. The brown paint, boarded windows, and broken gutter were still there. He seemed to be looking through them. A landmark corridor designation is moving through review, he said. If approved, Monument Court receives stronger exterior protections and access to certain preservation incentives. Does that mean the city can tell me what color to paint the door? In simple terms, yes. That doesn't sound valuable. It can be inconvenient. It can also protect the block from careless redevelopment. What does it do to the price? Luke opened his folder. He had brought sales records from nearby streets and a preliminary condition report based on public documents. His firm had valued number 14 before, but Walter had never answered its offers. Luke pointed to 3 comparable properties. Fully stabilized, systems updated, original details restored, and the corridor designation cleared, this house could appraise near $1,150,000. Sydney thought she had misheard him. Nathan didn't speak. Timothy stopped pouring coffee. How near? Sydney asked. That's a reasonable working figure, not a guarantee. Condition can move it in either direction. The city says it's unsafe. The city is correct. It owes $22,400 in taxes. I know. It needs a rear wall. It needs part of one. Sydney looked at the boarded front windows. And you're saying it's worth over $1 million? I'm saying it could be, after significant work. What is it worth today? Luke closed the folder. My firm would consider an all-is offer in the mid-600s, subject to title review. We'd assume the tax balance and stabilization costs. The amount struck her almost as hard as the larger one. The family had laughed at the trunk because hauling it away might cost money. Inside, it had been a path to a house Luke would buy while it was still condemned. Did you ever make that offer to my father? She asked. Not at that level. We didn't know how much original material remained. He never permitted an interior inspection. What was your last offer? $480,000. And he ignored it? He returned the letter with corrections to our description of the staircase. Nathan laughed once. Luke handed Sydney his card. I can prepare a written appraisal. I can also discuss a preservation partnership if you intend to keep the property. What does that mean? My firm handles exterior compliance and major structural work. The owner retains the house under an agreed budget and schedule, and makes money. How? We get paid. At least that part is simple. I try to keep one part simple. Sydney didn't accept the Az's offer. She didn't reject it either. Monica had told her not to sign anything, and Sydney had begun to understand how often a person's urgency became someone else's advantage. "Send the appraisal," she said. "No purchase agreement." Luke nodded. "That's fair." He emailed the preliminary valuation the next morning. By noon, Corey knew. Luke had called Patterson Finish and Frame, seeking old invoices for the doors and millwork. He wanted documentation for the appraisal. Corey answered the office phone that had once sat on Walter's desk. At 3, Sydney received a message from him. "Where are you?" She didn't answer. At 3:12, another arrived. "Mom says you found a property deed in the trunk." Sydney called Mr. Bell. "Did you tell Christine?" "I informed her that an additional property document may require review," he said. "I asked whether I had to notify the estate, and I advised that you should." Mrs. Patterson then spoke with Mr. Montoya. "What did he tell her?" "You would need to ask him." She called Luke. He answered immediately. "Did you discuss the appraisal with Christine?" She identified herself as Walter's widow and said she was helping administer family matters. "I confirmed the working valuation. I didn't send her the report." "You could have called me." "Yes, I should have." By 4, Christine's car had pulled onto Monument Court. Corey drove. Grace sat in the back. Sydney watched from the steps of number 14 as all 3 got out. Christine looked at the building, then at the neighboring houses. Corey photographed the front with his phone. Grace stayed near the car. Christine climbed the steps carefully. "You've been staying here?" "With Timothy." "You told Grace you needed time." "I did." "You didn't say you were investigating property Walter hid from us." Sydney looked at Corey. "Did you bring the will?" "I don't need it. You inherited Dad's company. The row house isn't part of the company. We don't know what it's part of." Christine lowered her voice. "Could we go inside?" "No. This was my husband's property. The city has limited access. Nathan is inside. He's doing stabilization work." "With whose authority?" Corey asked. Sydney stepped down until they were level. "Why did you come?" Christine pressed both hands together. She had rehearsed concern during the drive and meant to hold it longer. "We came because this affects the family. Yesterday, none of you knew it existed. That doesn't mean Walter intended to exclude us. He wrote a trust in 2017. Corey stopped taking pictures. Grace looked up. Christine's face changed very little, but enough. "Before we were married," she said. 2 years before. "Have you had that reviewed?" "I have an appointment." "Then you don't know what it means." "No, but I know what it says." Corey held out his hand. "Let me see it." "No. I run Walter's company. His business records may relate to this renovation. That doesn't make the trust yours. You don't know what's mine because you disappeared for 7 years." Sydney looked at him. "I didn't disappear. I changed my address." Grace closed the car door harder than necessary. Christine moved between them. "Stop. Both of you." She turned to Sydney. "If the trust is valid and the property is yours, then we should discuss what happens next." Luke made an offer. "I know, it's a sensible offer. You haven't seen the house. I've seen enough. Dad spent 14 years on it, and now he's gone." The words silenced everyone. Christine took a breath. "I'm not trying to be cold. The building needs money. You don't have that kind of money. Sell it while there's a serious buyer, pay the taxes, and divide what remains." "Divide it how?" "Fairly. Between the 4 of us. Walter would have wanted everyone secure. He created the trust before he married you. That doesn't mean he wanted you to keep over $1 million while the rest of the family struggles." Corey looked toward Grace. "Don't just stand there." Grace folded her arms. "What do you want me to say?" "The accounts Dad left you matter too," Sydney said. "Are you dividing those?" Grace looked down. Christine answered for her. "Those funds have already been committed." "To what?" "Family obligations." "What obligations?" Christine's mouth tightened. "That is private. Then my house is private." "We have 60 days, Christine said. Corey turned sharply toward her. The number had escaped before Christine could stop it. Sydney heard it. 60 days until what? Nothing you need to manage? Then why do you need me to sell? Christine walked back to the car. Corey stayed long enough to say, "Don't damage anything in that house. If it belongs to the estate, you'll be responsible." Then he followed his mother. Grace didn't move. Sydney waited until the car doors closed. What happens in 60 days? She asked. Grace stared through the windshield at Christine's back. Mom's business has been failing for 2 years, she said quietly. She borrowed against it in 2024. How much? $340,000. Sydney said nothing. It's a high-interest loan, Grace continued. There's a balloon payment. She thought she could refinance after a hotel contract came through, but the contract fell apart. Does Corey know? Yes. And you? I found out after Dad died. The investment accounts, about $200,000 after taxes and fees, maybe less. She asked me to use them toward the loan. Did you agree? Grace rubbed her hands together. I said I'd help. I didn't say I'd give her everything. Is the Winchester house at risk? Not directly. The business assets are. She signed a personal guarantee, so after that, I don't know. Now the rush dinner, the private talk with Mr. Bell, and Christine's interest in disposal made sense. Christine hadn't known the trunk held the deed. She had only known Sydney received nothing anyone could sell quickly. Then Luke placed a real number on the row house. Grace looked at number 14. Mom isn't trying to take your father away from you. She's trying to sell the thing he protected for me. She's scared. So am I. I know. No, you know what your fear costs. Mine hasn't sent an invoice yet. Grace accepted that. Before getting into the car, she said, Corey thinks if he can bring the property back into the estate, he can control the sale. Can he? He called a litigation attorney this morning. The rear passenger door opened. Corey leaned across the seat. Grace. She looked at Sydney once more, then got in. The car pulled away. Sydney returned inside and locked the repaired door behind her. Nathan was waiting beside the staircase. How much did you hear? She asked. Enough. She placed Luke's appraisal beside Walter's letter. The row house now had 2 values on the table. One was the price strangers would pay to acquire it. The other was the exact amount Christine needed from it before her 60 days ran out. Sydney slid both pages into separate folders. Walter's letter stays with the trust, Nathan said. Luke's appraisal stays somewhere Corey can't reach it. He can't reach anything here. Nathan looked toward the front door. The plywood had been removed, and Walter's repaired door now had a working lock. That didn't make the building secure. The rear gate could be climbed. 2 windows were still boarded from the outside. Anyone with a pry bar and patience could enter. They moved the blue document box to Nathan's fire cabinet that evening. On Friday morning, Sydney carried it into Monica Santos's office. Monica worked from the 2nd floor of a brick building near City Hall. Her waiting room had 3 chairs, a coat rack, and no decorative books pretending to be law books. She met Sydney at the reception desk and carried the document box herself. Nathan came because Sydney asked him. Timothy stayed on Monument Court to meet the drainage contractor. Monica wore a dark green sweater and reading glasses on a thin cord. She cleared her conference table before Sydney opened the box. Tell me where each item was found, she said. Sydney explained the trunk, the false lid, the note, Timothy's toolbox, and the staircase compartment. Monica didn't interrupt, except to confirm dates. When Sydney finished, Monica looked at Nathan. You witnessed both openings, the trunk and the staircase. Did you photograph them before removing the documents? Yes. Did anyone outside your group handle the originals? No. Good. Monica began with the deed from the trunk. She checked the registry stamp against the online record, then compared the legal description with the city parcel map. This deed is genuine, she said. It shows Walter purchased the property in 2012. By itself, it doesn't give Sydney anything. Sydney nodded. She had prepared for that sentence. Monica moved to Bertram's papers. The original 1962 purchase appeared in the registry's older scanned books. The foreclosure in 1975 appeared 37 pages later. Monica traced each later transfer on a yellow pad. Owners changed. A lender took possession. A holding company bought the property during a larger sale. That company conveyed it to Walter. There are no missing transfers, Monica said. No unexplained gap. The title chain runs cleanly from Bertram's purchase, through the foreclosure and later owners, to Walter's repurchase. Nathan looked at Sydney. So, it really is the same house. Yes, Monica said. That part is clear. She saved the trust for last. The document was 31 pages including attachments. Monica checked page numbers, initials, signatures, and the notarial certificate. Walter had signed in August of 2017. The notary's name was Eleanor Pike. Monica searched the state's historical commission records and found Eleanor's active term covering that date. Then she called a number listed in an old filing. Sydney heard only Monica's side of the conversation. "Ms. Pike, my name is Monica Santos. I'm reviewing a document you notarized in 2017 for Walter Patterson." A pause. "Yes, that Walter Patterson." Another pause. "I have the original certificate. I'm not asking you to verify his intent, only your procedure and record entry," Monica wrote while listening. "Would you still have your journal?" She looked at Sydney. "That would be very helpful." After the call, Monica removed her glasses. Eleanor Pike worked with the attorney who prepared the trust. She remembers Walter because he brought his own blue pen, refused hers, and then worried the ink color would invalidate everything. Sydney laughed quietly. "That's him." Her journal records his identification, signature, thumbprint, and the document title. She'll provide a certified copy. Does that prove it? It strongly supports authenticity. It isn't the only support. Monica placed the trust on a clean pad. Walter had declared the property held in an irrevocable trust. A separate trustee's deed transferred number 14 from Walter individually to Walter as trustee. That deed had been recorded 4 days later. The registry's official scan matched the stamped copy hidden in the staircase. Sydney saw the transfer they had stopped short of finding on Nathan's laptop. "Why didn't the city inspector see this?" she asked. "Tax and building systems don't always display trust details clearly. They may list Walter as the contact because he remained trustee. So, Christine never owned it." "No." "Did Dad own it?" "He controlled it as trustee. He couldn't treat it as an ordinary personal asset." Monica turned to the succession section. Upon Walter's death, Sydney became successor trustee. The trust directed her to distribute the property to herself, free of trust. Once outstanding taxes and necessary administration were handled, she was also the sole beneficiary. "Can Corey challenge that?" Sydney asked. "Anyone can file a claim. Winning is different." "What about the will?" The house wasn't part of Walter's probate estate when he signed that will. The will could give away the company, accounts, and personal belongings. It couldn't give away property the trust already held. And the marriage came 2 years later. Christine didn't contribute to the purchase, and the trust document bars later marital claims. "Based on what I've reviewed, this property stayed separate." Sydney rested her palms on the table. "Say it without lawyer words." Monica looked directly at her. "Walter legally protected number 14 for you. He did it in 2017. Christine, Corey, and Grace didn't inherit any part of it." Nathan released a breath beside her. Sydney didn't. "Not yet." "What do I need to do?" Monica made another list. Sydney would sign an acceptance as successor trustee. Monica would notify the tax collector and arrange payment terms to stop the tax title process. They would obtain a death certificate, file the proper trustee documents, and prepare the later distribution into Sydney's name. "Can I authorize repairs?" As successor trustee, yes. "Keep records, use permits. Don't mix money with Walter's probate estate or the contracting company." "What about the $22,400? "You owe it if you want clear title. We can likely secure time, but the balance won't disappear." Sydney thought of her $9,000, now reduced by the engineer and supplies. Luke offered to buy the house as is. That's one solution. He also mentioned a restoration partnership. That's another. "What would you do?" Monica put her glasses back on. "I would not answer that until I knew the repair budget, the tax deadline, and what keeping the house would cost your actual life." It was the first advice Sydney had received that didn't assume keeping or selling proved something about her. She signed the acceptance. Monica made certified copies, placed the originals in a fireproof client vault, and gave Sydney a sealed evidence packet. She also took digital copies of Nathan's photographs and Walter's letter. "If someone asks what you found," Monica said, "you may say counsel is reviewing title. Christine already knows about the trust. Does she have a copy?" "No." "Keep it that way until we notify the interested parties formally." "Why?" "Because people under financial pressure sometimes mistake early information for an invitation to negotiate." Nathan looked at Sydney. They had already seen that. Back on Monument Court, the drainage contractor had opened a trench near the rear foundation. Timothy stood beside it, arguing about where a pipe entered his property. He stopped when Sydney and Nathan came through the gate. "Well?" he asked. Sydney held up the sealed packet. It's real. Timothy closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked less relieved than tired. He had protected Walter's secret for years. Now it had moved into someone else's hands. Everything, he asked, the deed, the trust, your promise, all of it, and the house, mine, once we clear the taxes and filings. Timothy nodded toward the trench. Then your pipe is 6 inches inside my line. Is that bad? It's expensive, the contractor corrected him. It's inconvenient. Expensive inconvenience, Timothy said. Sydney changed into work clothes. That afternoon, they opened the rear drainage channel and found the source of the foundation movement. An old clay section had cracked beneath the yard. Water had washed soil away from the wall over several seasons. It was repairable. Not cheap, but repairable. Luke returned with a stabilization proposal. His firm would advance part of the structural cost in exchange for a limited preservation agreement and the right to bid on later exterior work. Monica reviewed it by email and removed 2 clauses that gave his firm too much control over a future sale. Sydney didn't sign yet. She wanted Nathan's estimate first. They stayed at number 14 until after dark, measuring joists and marking damaged plaster. Timothy left at 8 to watch a basketball game. Nathan went to his shop at 9 because one of his employees had broken a router bit and couldn't find the spare. Sydney remained long enough to sweep the front room. The newel post stood open where they had removed the hidden panel. She had wrapped the rail in canvas to protect it. Before leaving, she checked the front lock, then walked around the side passage to the rear gate. The padlock was in place. At 2 in the morning, her phone rang in Timothy's guest room. She woke to Grace's name on the screen. "Hello?" Grace was whispering. "Is Corey at the house?" Sydney sat up. "What?" "Number 14. Is he there?" "No." Grace went silent. "Why would he be there?" Sydney asked. "He left Mom's an hour ago. He took a tool bag." Sydney was already pulling on her jeans. What did he say? That he needed proof Walter was still working after his judgment got bad. What proof? He wouldn't tell me. Across the room, number 14 was dark. Then a narrow light moved behind the boarded front window. Sydney crossed to the glass. Someone inside the row house had reached the staircase. The beam stopped beside the newel post, exactly where Walter had hidden the trust. Sydney didn't cross the street. She called Nathan first, then the police. After that, she woke Timothy. "There's someone in 14, she said. He reached for his glasses. "Who?" "Corey." Timothy looked through the window. The moving light disappeared. Nathan arrived before the patrol car. He parked across the rear alley, blocking the gate with his truck. By the time 2 officers entered through the front, the house was empty. Corey had gone through the basement hatch. He left it open behind him. Nothing had been taken. The documents were already in Monica's vault. But the canvas around the stair rail had been cut, and fresh pry marks ran down the edge of the hidden panel. One corner of the newel cap had split. Nathan crouched beneath the work light. He tried to remove the whole section. Sydney stood beside him. Could he? Not quickly. An officer photographed the damage. Sydney gave Corey's name and explained the trust dispute. The officer wrote everything down, though his expression said he had seen families call theft by several softer names. "Do you want to make a trespass complaint?" he asked. "Yes. You'll need to show he was notified. He had no permission to enter. He asked to come inside yesterday. I said no. Any witness?" 3. The officer nodded. "Save every message. Don't contact him tonight." Grace called again while they were still inside. "Did you find him?" "He got out through the basement." "Did he take anything?" "He tried to pull apart the staircase." Grace made a quiet sound. "What did he tell you?" Sydney asked. "Nothing." "You called because he took a tool bag." "That isn't nothing. I didn't know he was going there." "I believe you." "What did he say after he left?" Grace didn't answer. Nathan looked at Sydney and shook his head. "Don't force it over the phone," Sydney said. "Come see what he did in the morning." Grace arrived before 7. The front room was gray with early light. Nathan had covered the damaged rail with clear protective film. He left the cut canvas in place for the police report. Grace stopped at the staircase. "He did that?" "The marks are new," Nathan said. "The split is new." Grace touched neither one. Sydney handed her a copy of Walter's note and showed her where the document box had been. She didn't show the trust. "Corey believed evidence was hidden here," Sydney said. "He came with tools after I refused him access." Grace sat on the bottom step. "He messaged me from inside," she said. "Show me." Grace opened her phone. Corey's message had arrived at 1:37. Found the compartment. Papers are gone. I'm taking the post before she destroys whatever is left. A second message followed. If Mom asks, I was driving home. Grace stared at the screen. He wanted me to lie for him. Yes. He said he only needed proof. He tried to remove the place where the proof was kept. Grace forwarded both messages to Sydney. Then she forwarded them directly to Monica. I'll tell the police too, she said. Sydney sat beside her, leaving space between them. Why now? Because yesterday I could pretend he was protecting Mom. I can't pretend this is that, Grace cried without covering her face. Sydney didn't touch her. This wasn't the time for forgiveness, and neither woman confused honesty with repair. Corey filed his petition that afternoon. He asked the Suffolk County Probate and Family Court to stop Sydney from selling, repairing, or transferring number 14. He claimed Walter had hidden marital property while suffering diminished capacity. He also challenged the will's treatment of undisclosed assets and demanded that the row house be placed under estate control until its ownership could be decided. Christine signed an affidavit supporting him. Grace did not. Monica read the filing at Timothy's dining table. He wants an emergency order, Sydney said. He wants control before we can finish recording your authority. Can he get it? Temporarily, if the judge believes the property is at risk. The property is at risk. That's why we're repairing it. And we have permits, an engineer, and records showing that. Nathan sat near the window with Luke's structural proposal. If the order stops work, the rear wall gets worse. Monica nodded. We'll request an expedited evidentiary hearing. The city deadline helps us. What about the trust? We disclose that it exists. We don't hand Corey our entire case before his sworn testimony. Sydney understood. Corey had built his petition on assumptions. He believed Walter's secrecy looked like confusion. He believed the documents could be challenged because nobody had yet shown him how they were authenticated. He believed entering the row house would be treated as a family misunderstanding. Monica intended to let him say all of that where it mattered. The court allowed emergency stabilization to continue, but prohibited any sale or permanent transfer until the hearing. For 3 weeks, number 14 remained under that order. Nathan's crew installed steel bracing at the rear wall. Luke's firm repaired the drainage line under a limited contract Monica approved. Sydney paid the tax office an initial amount and signed a short payment arrangement that stopped further collection while ownership was before the court. Every expense went into a binder. Every damaged board was photographed. Corey sent no apology. Through his attorney, he asked for access to inspect the property. Monica agreed to one supervised visit. Corey spent 20 minutes photographing Walter's unfinished rooms and 5 minutes studying the staircase. He didn't look at Sydney. Christine didn't attend. Grace came separately 2 days later. She brought Walter's old appointment calendar from the Winchester office. Corey was clearing drawers, she said. I took this before he threw it out. The calendar showed Walter's work at number 14 in coded entries. MC appeared across years, long before his heart condition worsened. In 2017, the date of the trust carried one word, Pike. Monica copied the page. The morning of the hearing was cold and clear. Suffolk County Probate and Family Court occupied a building Sydney had passed many times without noticing. Inside, security officers searched bags beneath fluorescent lights. People stood in hallways holding folders and speaking quietly with attorneys. Sydney wore the same dark trousers she used for job interviews. Nathan carried the repair binder. Timothy wore a navy jacket and complained that the courthouse coffee cost too much. Luke arrived with a completed appraisal and condition report. Grace came alone. Christine and Corey entered together with their attorney. Corey wore a charcoal suit. Christine held the handbag she had carried to the will reading. She looked at Sydney once, then turned away. The courtroom was smaller than Sydney expected. There was no jury. The judge sat above them, with a clerk to one side and a court officer near the door. Sydney took her place beside Monica. You don't need to react to anything, Monica said. What if they lie? Then let them finish. Corey's attorney began. He described Walter as an aging man whose health had declined. He said Walter managed property in secret, left taxes unpaid, and concealed major assets from his wife and business. He called the trust uncertain, the circumstances suspicious, and Sydney's removal of documents improper. Sydney held her hands together beneath the table. Corey testified first. He stated that Walter had become forgetful during his final years. He described missed company meetings, duplicated supply orders, and invoices placed in the wrong files. "When did you begin working full-time at Patterson Finish and Frame?" his attorney asked. 2022. The trust had been signed 5 years earlier. Corey didn't mention that. He said Walter treated him like a son and intended the contracting business to support the entire family. He claimed number 14 had been restored, using company tools, labor, and materials, which should make it a company or estate asset. "Did you know of the property before Walter's death?" "No." "When did you learn of it?" "After Sydney removed the trunk from the will reading." "Did she inform the family promptly?" "No." "Did she permit you to inspect the property?" "She refused." "Did you enter number 14 without her permission?" Corey hesitated. Sydney felt Monica become still beside her. "I entered because I believed estate evidence was being removed," Corey said. "What did you do inside?" "I inspected the staircase." "Did you take anything?" "No." "Did you damage anything?" "Not intentionally." He committed to each answer in a clear voice. Christine testified next. She told the court Walter had hidden the row house throughout their marriage. She said they shared expenses, plans, and responsibilities, and that discovering a property worth more than $1 million had left her shocked. "Did Walter ever tell you he intended this property solely for Sydney?" the attorney asked. "No." "Did he discuss creating a trust?" "No." "Did you observe changes in him near the end of his life?" "Yes. He was tired, forgetful, secretive." "When did those changes begin?" Christine looked toward Corey. "Several years before his death." "How many?" "I can't say exactly." "Before your marriage?" Christine's answer took too long. "I didn't know him as well then." Her attorney moved on. He introduced Luke's preliminary valuation, obtained through a subpoena, and argued that Sydney lacked money to preserve the house. He showed photographs of the condemned notice, the cracked masonry, and open walls. Then he asked Christine what she believed Walter would have wanted. He would have wanted the property sold safely, she said. He would have wanted the proceeds used for the family, not for one person. She never mentioned the loan. Corey's attorney asked the court to invalidate the trust, place number 14 under estate administration, and appoint Corey to control repairs and any sale. When he finished, the judge looked toward Monica. Sydney glanced at the sealed evidence packet on the table. Monica left it closed. "Ms. Santos," the judge said, "you may proceed." Monica opened the packet and removed the 2017 trust. She began with dates. Walter bought number 14 in 2012. He created the irrevocable trust 5 years later. He married Christine 2 years after that. His documented heart decline came much later. She handed certified registry records to the clerk. "The property left Walter Patterson's personal ownership before the marriage," Monica said. "It never entered his probate estate." Corey's attorney objected that the documents hadn't been properly authenticated. Monica called Eleanor Pike's certified notary journal, Walter's signed trust, the recorded trustee's deed, and the registry's matching copy into evidence. The judge compared the recording numbers. Then Monica called Timothy. He described Bertram's foreclosure and Walter's 37-year effort to buy the house back. "What did Walter tell you after signing the trust?" Monica asked. "He said the house would go to the child who showed Bertram's grit, not the person sharing his roof, not whoever asked loudest after he died." "Did he identify that person?" "Yes." "Sydney." "Did he appear confused?" "No." "Difficult, secretive, and too proud?" "Yes." "Confused, no." Nathan testified to opening the trunk. He showed the photographs taken before the false lid was lifted. The recorded deed lay exactly where Walter had placed it, beneath a floor weighted to sound solid. He then showed the staircase photographs. The hidden document box was still in position when they opened the wall panel. The trust had not been created or altered by Sydney. Luke confirmed the appraisal. "Would the condition of the row house make its ownership unclear?" Monica asked. "No. It makes the repair expensive. That's different." Finally, Grace walked to the witness chair. Christine stared at her daughter. Corey didn't look at her at all. Grace identified the messages from the night Corey entered number 14. Monica displayed them. "Found the compartment. Papers are gone. I'm taking the post before she destroys whatever is left. If Mom asks, I was driving home." "Did Sydney ask you to obtain these messages?" Monica said. "No." "Did she promise you money or any part of the house?" "No." Why did you provide them? Grace looked toward the damaged staircase photograph. Because Corey wanted me to lie, and because he wasn't preserving evidence. He was trying to remove the place where it had been hidden. Corey's attorney stood. My client believed estate property was being concealed. Monica faced Corey. You testified that Walter's company paid for the restoration. Do you have invoices showing company funds spent at number 14? No. Payroll records? No. Material orders assigned to that address? Walter used false client names. Can you prove that beyond the 3 cabinet doors Nathan identified? Corey shifted. Not yet. You began full-time work at the company in 2022? Yes. 5 years after the trust? Yes. And you had never heard of number 14 until the trunk was opened? No. Monica returned to her table. The petition depends on a later marriage reaching backward into an earlier irrevocable trust. It depends on recent illness invalidating documents signed while Walter was working full-time. It also asks the court to reward control taken after death over ownership established during life. She placed Walter's letter beside the trust. The mechanism is simple. Walter transferred the row house out of his personal estate in 2017. He named Sydney sole beneficiary and successor trustee. No will contest can pull property into an estate that didn't own it. The judge recessed for 40 minutes. Nobody spoke in the hallway. When they returned, the judge delivered the decision from the bench. The trust was valid. The deed and title chain were authenticated. Sydney was confirmed as successor trustee and sole beneficiary, with authority to distribute number 14 into her own name after resolving the taxes. Corey's incapacity claim lacked credible evidence from the year the trust was signed. His request to place the property under estate control was denied. The contest was dismissed. The judge also ordered that Corey have no unsupervised access to number 14 while the trespass complaint remained open. Christine lowered her head. Corey closed his folder and walked out before anyone else stood. Outside the courtroom, Grace approached Sydney. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. Good, Grace nodded. I should have asked questions before the money mattered. Yes. They stood there with that answer between them. Then Sydney said, you told the truth when it cost you something. It should have happened sooner. It should have. Their relationship didn't repair in the courthouse. It simply stopped getting worse. Christine waited near the elevator. The lender takes the business assets next month if I can't refinance, she said. Sydney heard the fear without accepting the claim beneath it. I'm sorry you're facing that. I thought Walter's estate would keep all of us secure. He kept the house separate. I know that now. Sydney didn't offer money. Christine didn't ask again. She sold the remaining inventory from her design business, negotiated more time on the personal guarantee, and put the Winchester house on the market by summer. It was painful, but it was her problem to manage. Corey kept the contracting company. Several longtime workers left after he tried to cut their hours. Nathan declined his offer to take over the finish department. Their contact remained limited to records Walter had left behind. Sydney rejected Luke's purchase offer. She accepted a narrower preservation agreement after Monica revised it. Luke's firm stabilized the rear wall and restored the brick front. A local bank approved a renovation loan against the now clear title, with work released in stages. The first draw paid the $22,400 in taxes. Nathan handled the interior. Sydney worked beside him. They finished the walnut staircase first. She sanded the damaged newel cap until the pry marks softened without disappearing. Nathan showed her how to mix the finish Walter had planned. Timothy complained about the smell and brought dinner anyway. The house changed room by room. The boarded windows reopened. Heat ran through new pipes. The front fireplace received its numbered surround. Sydney kept the worn floorboards, including the pale mark where Walter's folding chair had stood. Grace came twice a month. At first, she only carried supplies. Later, Sydney let her paint the second-floor hall. They spoke about practical things, brushes, parking, their father's calendar. Neither rushed toward closeness they hadn't earned. By autumn, the city cleared the unsafe structure notice. Sydney moved from Timothy's guest room with one suitcase, the same suitcase that had fit at the foot of his bed. Her Providence apartment was emptied the following weekend. The front room of number 14 became a teaching shop on weekdays. Nathan moved 2 benches from his business and helped Sydney establish a small apprenticeship in Walter Patterson's name for young adults aging out of foster care. The first apprentices learned repairs before new construction, Loose chair joints, split drawers, window sash, work that taught them damaged didn't mean useless. Nathan taught the machines, Sydney taught patient handwork. Timothy handled coffee and acted offended whenever anyone called him helpful. The warped trunk took longer than expected. Sydney removed the ruined canvas, treated the rusted straps, and repaired the swollen corner without making it look new. Nathan rebuilt the leather handles. They preserved the false lid and its hidden pins. Sydney read it aloud and shook her head. That isn't the whole story. Nathan tested the restored lock. Headlines usually aren't. The whole story was in the work that followed. If stories about young people rebuilding a life after family betrayal matter to you, subscribe and return for the next inheritance story. That evening, Sydney closed the teaching shop and swept sawdust from the front floor. Upstairs, the pipes clicked softly as the heat came on. Timothy's red door glowed 2 houses away. She set Walter's old block plane inside the restored trunk, lowered the false lid, and closed the warped top. Then she turned off the hall light, climbed the staircase her father had left for her to finish, and went home.